Hello and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons, and today we're talking about goat demons and desert satyrs. Let's get into this one. Hello, and if you're new to the channel, this is part of our series going through a series of essays from the NIV Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. And as I bring up often and never remember to get it out of the closet, I can see about 2 feet away from me John Oswald's book, The Bible Among the Myths, which goes through the theology and thoughts of the Old Testament and shows how it's so unique compared to its neighbors, whether that's the Canaanites, whether that's the Midianites, whether that is the Egyptians, whoever. And shows how it is so utterly unique. It can't have just been an evolution of thought from their neighbors, as modern skeptical scholarship likes to try and take and use as an argument, whereas 60, 80 years ago, even in skeptical scholarship, they didn't use this argument. It was generally taken for granted, even among them, that was the case, that this theology was unique and not just an evolution of thought from their neighbors. The only thing that changed was philosophy. None of the evidence actually changed. So we are going through this series of essays to sort of build on that point and go through it. And of course, I recommend getting John Oswald's book. It's a short, wonderful read. I don't agree with everything he says in there. You probably won't do that with any book you ever read. Well, except for one book, the Bible. But a lot of good things in these essays, a lot of great things in that book, and a lot of things there. And just a quick introduction to myself. I don't do this a lot. I probably should in the videos. I am a student at Asbury Theological Seminary. I am pursuing a Master's of Divinity with a specialization in chaplaincy. I intend to be moving into prison chaplaincy. I am not an official representative of Asbury for any reason, and just want to make that clear. I know I get heated and emotional in quite a few of these videos on certain topics that are very important and matter a lot. But we are getting into this essay here. And at the end of this video, maybe we'll have some more thoughts on unrelated to this topic. But let's go and get into this. Goat Demons and Desert Satyrs. This is page 177 of the Archaeological Study Bible. If you try to find this, it is important to get the Archaeological Study Bible. It is out of print, so it will be a little bit more expensive. I believe you can find some digital versions online. And this is on Leviticus 17. God commanded that no Israelite was to sacrifice an ox, lamb, or goat, either within the confines of the camp or outside in the open country. Leviticus 17, 1 through 9. Instead, the animals were brought to the door of the tent of meeting. This practice effectively eliminated ambiguity as to the nature of any sacrifice. And then it references in a footnote here to go back to an essay we've already read, and I will put that right about here if you're watching here on YouTube. It'll be right over there, on the sacrifices in the Old Testament. As a case in point, no Israelite was to offer an illicit sacrifice to a pagan deity outside the view of the Lord's priest, and when discovered, claimed to be offering it to the God of Israel. The law was important because Israelites had previously offered sacrifices to goats as objects of worship. Whether the reference in verse 7 is to live goats worshipped as manifestations of goat spirits or to man-made idols in the form of goats, we have no way of knowing for certain. The NIV translators chose to render the Hebrew term here as goat idols. It is also possible that the goats in question were thought of to have been some kind of demons or satyrs, i.e. creatures that were part goat, part man. We have no certain grounds for suggesting that this is what the biblical writer had in mind, but in light of analogies from ancient pagan religions, the association is not impossible. It is true that the Hebrew word sometimes translated goat idols or goat demons, more frequently simply to goats, such as in Isaiah 34:14. We are aware that goat images were worshipped many years later during the reign of Jeroboam I in 2 Chronicles 11:15. Who introduced a rival religious system into the northern kingdom, 1 Kings 12:28 through 31, complete with priests, high places, and images of calves and goats. And it references an essay we haven't read yet, The High Place of Dan, on page 504. Although the Israelites sometimes sacrificed goats, such as Leviticus 16, they were never to sacrifice 2 goats. And then it actually has a picture of Pan here. If you don't know who Pan is, he's a that is not focusing. One of the deities in the Greek pantheon, and has, of course, inspired many movies. The Labyrinth of Pan is, I guess, depending on who you ask, famous or infamous. This is a little side tangent. Mom, if you're watching this, I love you. My mom, back when Blockbuster and Friends were still around, for those of us old enough to remember Blockbuster, it was you'd go get a physical movie. I know that sounds crazy to some people today, whether that's a DVD, a VHS tape, and you'd rent it and take it home and watch it and then take it back. We're just going to set this right here. And she got a movie on the Labyrinth of Pan, and it wasn't in English. None of us understood it. The movie was very strange on its own. My mother was the worst at picking movies. They were either inappropriate and we had to turn them off, or they were just terrible movies. And at some point, we should have learned to stop letting her pick the movies, and we never did. Anyway, complete unrelated tangent, just a funny story there. But right, this is one of those things that makes their sacrificial system different than their neighbors. As we've already discussed, the purpose of their sacrificial system, I shouldn't have closed that, I'm an idiot. The purpose of their sacrificial system isn't the same as the others, and there is an assurance, unlike with their neighbors, where when they make a sacrifice to a deity, that deity may not be appeased. They might still smite you. You're not certain. In this, right, and as this clearly expounded, right, Scripture is one whole book, you need to read it together. As clearly as expounded in other places, when you are bringing your sacrifices, not just as vain offerings without any faith in the Lord, as just doing them to get through the motions, or thinking they're working like a magic ritual to forgive you your sins so you can just go do it again, that's clearly condemned. And here, right, they're eliminating any confusion on what these sacrifices could be for. And that matters a lot. The ambiguity is something, I don't know if a feature is the right word, but I don't want to say it's a bug either. That's computer lingo for either something that is unintentional in a sacrificial system of their ancient Near East neighbors, or maybe it is simply part of the system. Because in the sacrificial system of many pagan groups, not just in the ancient Near East, but even into the Roman times, there was just a lot of uncertainty on things. Now, of course, there were set rituals. For them, magic and ritual were the same thing, right? If you were performing a religious ceremony, it was a magic ritual. This eliminates that entirely. But there were also times where you didn't know what you needed to do. In the Leviticus Law Code, there is no ambiguity. You know exactly when you have to offer the sacrifice. Here's where you're doing it. Here's what you're doing. Here's why you're doing it. And, we have examples from the Greeks, right? The oracles, if something would happen, if there was a drought, if a war was lost, right? There's like, the gods are angry, and the truth, demons. And they would consult their books, and they would, through some form of divination, consult the text and see what they need to do. And, it varied from offer a sacrifice at the temple to bury 2 people alive in the street. And we have records of them grabbing people and burying them in the street. And, right, especially once you get to the Roman culture, for them, they're not viewing, if you're not a Roman, you're not even human. So they are going to have no qualms with just taking you and burying you in the street alive. That's the thing that happened. So you see there is a lot of, from temple sacrifice to grab the 2 nearest people and bury them alive. There's a lot of room between those 2 things. And you don't have that in this Leviticus Law Code. There is not these spots of ambiguity of being uncertain what's going to happen when you're offering them properly. It's just so different. Like I'm still trying to, because believe it or not, I'm sure this is not too unbelievable for anybody. Sacrificial systems are not necessarily a spot I am an expert of study on, and in all their nuances and differences. Especially some of the ancient literature that's a bit harder to get through when it talks about certain types of sacrifices that no culture approves of today. And if you don't know what that is, feel free to ask in the comments and I will clarify there. That is just hard to read and to get through. And I make a practice of reading texts that are hard, that show the darkness of humanity. Because it's important to remember those things. It's important to know how to speak into those things. And to understand that that is a feature of humanity. That it's not something we're supposed to have, but it does happen. And you need to be prepared to handle that. And the law code and the sacrificial system of the Hebrews was a way in which that was supposed to be handled. And, of course, we see the Hebrews and later the Israelites continue to stray from the Lord, continue to fail in these errors, to the point that they start engaging in a lot of those condemned sacrifices that the Lord told them never to do. And they do them anyway, So there is some lesson of warning there on listening when we should listen. But also take time to just reflect, right? If you read Leviticus for the first time, it's a hard book to get through. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But when you're reading through, right, you might not, especially by the time you get to Leviticus 17, you might not be thinking, oh, why are they having to do the sacrifice in this place? Why not these other spots? Why can't they go out in the desert and do this? Why can't they sacrifice to these things, It's because they're forms of worship. It's because the location matters. You can't have ambiguity on who the sacrifice is to if you're only doing it in the appointed high places, things like that. And again, and this is where I recommend getting a commentary, especially for a book like Leviticus. This is teaching Leviticus, but if you're not someone who plans on teaching, of course, you'll still find plenty of practical wisdom there and in other places. Watch our video on the food laws of Leviticus. I'll try and put that right, here. And if not, it's in this playlist that this video will be housed in, is linked in the doobly-doo below. And I go through some stuff there. And there's some, check the pinned comments for that, on some good Leviticus material that's both available in video, and then also recommend some books from Disciple Dojo. They're his videos, and he recommends some commentaries in there. And they're good commentaries from beginner to advanced, because many Leviticus commentaries, unfortunately, are very technical. They're very scholar-oriented, shall we say. And that is not for the average reader, and that is okay. I'm not sure they're even for me. I have muscled through some of them, but they're worth it. Go through those things if you can, and if not, you can't read everything. Read what you're going to use. Read what's a benefit to you. That's it. I'll see you guys in the next video, and hopefully the series has been good. And I hope you're sharing this with friends who, especially if they're not believers and are critical and skeptical of Christianity. There are a lot of questions that Christianity sort of poses to people that are, about your eternal life. Not just who is Jesus, but how do you explain? If you're going to not just even reject Christianity, but at times there are plenty of people who attack it. If you're going to attack it, do you understand it? Do you know it? Do you know its history? Can you answer, where does the Old Testament come from? Why is it so different than their neighbors? How did the Hebrews, as a bunch of nomads in the deserts and the waste, rise up and conquer some of the most potent military forces around them? Can you answer that question? Because that doesn't just happen in human history. Something special happened there, and that's something at least to ponder on. And that's it. There you go. That's my invitation. And that's my invitation in this series. For if you are a Christian, hopefully this series is a nice apologetic toolbox for you, and you're getting some very good tools to be using in conversations. And if you're not a Christian, I want to poke you. I want to prod you, and I want to push you and challenge you and be like, can you answer this question for these differences? Where are these things coming from? If they're just making it up, they're pretty weird and unique compared to the beliefs of their neighbors to have just been made up, especially at their time, right? People didn't question that there were deities, plural. There were pantheons everywhere. People accepted that. That was just a part of their life. Why are these people coming along and rejecting these, and rejecting the sacrificial system of their neighbors, rejecting the sort of temple prostitution, right? Why are these people rejecting all these things their neighbors are doing and doing something very unique, That's a big question to ask, and plays into a lot of the history and power and truth of Christianity of like, we're different because it's divine revelation from the Lord Most High. That's what we put forward. And if you don't have another answer that adequately explains all these things, maybe consider that as the actual answer and think about what that means for your life. There you go. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.